The Underminer is back once again on chess.com, and it's been a while since we have not posted a video online or YouTube. That is due to the fact that we are streaming most of the time on lichess.org. And the game that I'm going to show you today, it was played um, a while ago on chess.com, and our opponent is a titled player who is a candidate master with a rapid rating online 2124, and our rating at that time of the game is 2092. But I consider this game as part of my 2100 journey, although it hasn't reached 2100 at that time yet. But yeah, I considered it as one of my 2100 journey games. Now, without further ado, I open up with 1c4, and this is the beginning of the English opening. And our opponent, since he's not new to the game, respond with e6. I develop my knight to c3, and he attacks the center. I capture the pawn, he captured back, and I block the possible advance of the pawn by playing d4. He develops the knight to f6. I also developed mine to f3, and he added another defender to the d5 pawn. I pushed my pawn to g3 with the idea of fianchettoing the bishop or developing the bishop that way, but in this position, Stockfish actually recommends bishop f4. But since we don't think like a computer or an engine, therefore we believe that g3 is the way to go. And by the way, I would like to emphasize this, that if you're watching this video and you believe that you are a better player than me, and you think or you believe that what I'm saying here are all bullshit and all nonsense, then please, if you believe that you are a better player or knows how to play the game already, please don't watch this video, because this is not for you. Okay? If you think that, you already know everything, don't mock me because I do these things. Just prove yourself that you are better. All right. So yes, this is not for you. And the game continued with our opponent playing bishop d6, ready to castle in the next move. And so I played bishop g2, justifying our push g3. Our opponent castled. We also castled because we believe that I am a principal player, and so king safety is my top priority. And our opponent pushed the pawn to h6 with only one idea, is to guard the g5 square so that we can no longer go or develop our bishop there and pin the knight, or we can no longer hop our knight to that square because it's been guarded. So that's the only, I believe that that's the only idea by pushing h6. And so the game continued with me developing or pushing my rook to e1. And so our opponent also centralizes its rook to e8. And I push a3 with the idea of pushing the pawn to b4 and exert our dominance on that side of the board, because we are gaining space and our opponent prevent us from doing so. And I developed the queen to c2 with only one idea, is to support that square in case if our opponent will allow us to push this pawn to e4 later on. But that is a long-term plan, because we need more preparatory move in order to do that exactly. We can retreat the knight right here, and perhaps by that time we can push the pawn to e4 with only one intention, is to push it further to e5 and create a fork on the bishop and the knight, but I don't think that our opponent will allow that to happen because he is a very experienced player and also not to mention a titled one. Therefore, the game continue with bishop g4 attacks our knight. And so I decide to block my own bishop instead because I cannot develop the bishop right here. It will just be captured anyway. And I cannot go there because it's already been guarded. Therefore, I decided to just block it and perhaps delay the development in the future. And so our opponent develops the knight. We develop the bishop to d2, which is the only square available for it. And so the bishop retreats. Now, when I saw this, the bishop retreats with only one intention to go to g6, actually, where it can pressure the light square diagonal and, dominate from g6 in a distance. And it attacks the diagonal where my queen is located, actually. So when I saw that, I pushed my knight or hopped my knight to h4, preventing the bishop from going to g6. However, our opponent is not an ordinary player. Therefore, he really wants to play bishop g6 and drives our knight away before doing so. And in this position, actually, I only have two squares available for the knight where it cannot be captured straight away. It's the f5 or the f3. So I have two options. Now, if I hop the knight to f5, then this bishop will definitely go back to g6 and it can pin the knight where my queen is. And in the future, it will be very difficult for me to defend that knight once our opponent adds more pressure to it. And since we know that our opponent is a candidate master, he will find ways. So I don't want to have that problem. Therefore, I choose to retreat my knight, which Stockfish brands it as a mistake. Actually, when I check or review the game later on, Stockfish recommends to put the knight to f5. Well, we're not Stockfish, therefore we retreats the knight. And so the bishop went to where it should be. And so I retreat my queen, and the knight hops in the middle of the board, putting pressure on the bishop and the knight. And when I realized that my rook is helpless on a1, so I moved my queen to d1 in order to give way to the rook to go to c1. So that's the only intention. Really, I can move it earlier from c2 to d1 straight away, but I was like reluctant because perhaps the bishop will go back there and pin the knight again. So this time around, there is really a need to move the queen away from the c1 square because I need my rook to become active. And so our opponent played queen e7. Now, queen e7, this is the difference between title players or masters and the difference between a wannabe like myself against a candidate master. Because by this move, if you look at it, it seems like a normal developing move. But when my opponent played this, he saw 5 moves ahead. Now, bear in mind, 5 moves ahead. So this is the difference between a title player and a wannabe player like myself. So let's watch it. And I proceed with my plan to move my rook to c1. And when he hops the knight to b6, that's when I realized that I am in trouble. Because this knight, I never saw this coming, really. I thought the knight will just go there. You know, I never even anticipated that this knight will go to b6. But seeing this, the knight can now hop here, putting pressure on this b2 pawn, and at the same time attacks my bishop twice, right? So what I did was to move my rook to e2, and my plan really was to push the bishop right here in case if the knight will not take it, and if the knight takes the knight, then I can just easily defend that pawn. But I don't think it will happen, so I just push there my rook to e2, and like maybe I can retreat and save the bishop to leave another day. And so the knight hops there, pressuring the pawn. I retreated the bishop, and actually in that position, I did not even realize that it's possible. So this is the move that I'm talking about when I said when my opponent moved the queen to e7, he saw this move. Knight takes pawn. In spite of the fact that Stockfish brands this as an inaccurate move, but this is a real tactic, really. So I took the knight, he captured the pawn, skewers it, and so I moved the other rook. It took the other one, I captured it back, and when he moves the queen, this is actually a blunder, according to our friendly neighborhood Stockfish, because I can take this pawn right there, and he won't be able to capture it back because the queen will hang, because this queen sees that queen right there. Unfortunately, my objective was not to capture a pawn, right? My objective is to eliminate this bishop who is giving me a lot of headaches. So I just followed a wisdom from former American world champion and grandmaster Bobby Fischer. Not his exact words, but I remember something like, if you have something or a piece from your opponent that's giving you a lot of headaches, then that piece or that square or whatever it is, that piece must be captured at all cost or perhaps exchanged. Remembering that during the game, so I hopped the knight there, which is, according to Stockfish, is a mistake because, well, the threat is to knight takes d5. But since my objective is to eliminate the bishop, so I proceed with the plan, and he captured my knight, I took it back, and he pushed the pawn. I don't know why, really, to be honest, but I took the bishop, he took it back, he captured back the knight, and so I gave him a check, which is, he cannot capture the bishop because the queen will hang. And so the king moves, I retreated the bishop, because I don't want to be pressured again later on and, create another problem. And this time around, our opponent has like at least 3 pawns on the queen side, majority on the queen side. So the queen moves away. And at first I thought, oh, what is that queen doing there? And then I realized that it was sniping my rook right here, and silently, aiming for my rook on a2. And so I moved my rook to a1, but Stockfish actually recommends that I should move the queen to a1 instead, protecting the rook and at the same time adding pressure to this a4 pawn, because our opponent cannot defend the pawn by pushing another one to b5, because the c6 pawn will hang definitely, and will only walk into a port on both rooks right there. So therefore, the game continued. I pushed my rook back to a1, and our opponent, I'm not sure, with 1 minute on his clock, I am not sure why he offered an exchange. So I took it. He captured it back. I put pressure on the pawn, which can be difficult to defend, or it cannot be defended, properly, since the pawns are too far. So he defended it with his rook. I attacked the defender. He moves it. I captured the pawn. So in this position now, our opponent double broke. So my thought process was that probably is going to give me a check. So I moved the bishop away in order to give my king a room for escape later on. And what he did was to infiltrate on my second rank. So seeing this, I realized that if I could exchange one rook, my bishop would be more powerful than one rook. So a bishop pair. So what I did was to block the only available open file, because these are all semi-open files, right? It's not really that open. Therefore, the only open file is the A file. So I blocked the rook. However, he took it. I don't know why. Maybe our opponent really underestimates our ability to play. So I took the rook and he attacks my bishop. And so I blocked the only possible uh, square that the pawn can advance and put pressures on these two pawns, which I cannot allow to advance later on because it will be a headache again. And so the game continue with the king moves going to the center. And so my objective at this time is to exchange pieces as much as possible, because seeing the time, he only have 20 seconds left. And all I need to do is to clear any possible, like obstacles on the board. It has to be clear so that my bishop can work effectively in the process. Therefore, I challenge the pawn on c6. He took it, I took it, attacks the rook. He gives me a check, so I have to move my king to g2. And actually, this is not a threat, because I can give him a check first and then capture the pawn later on. So that is why I was not worried about it. And so he protects the pawn. I attack the rook again. He moved it and I give him a check. He moves back to h7. And so in this position, like I said earlier, that my intention is to exchange pieces as much as possible. And so I push the pawn and mouse slip in the process instead of pushing it to h4, and it only went to h3, but he pushes his pawn to b5 and I push it again to h4. He took it, I took it back, and he blocks my pawn advance, actually, because the threat is to push it since this pawn is pinned. And so I advance the other pawn and he attacks my bishop. I move my king up in order to centralize in the middle of the board, and he moves his rook to a4, having only 1.1 seconds left. And so I advance the pawn again, and he made a mistake. And actually, Stockfish brands this as a blunder. And so I capitalized on it. I took the pawn with a check. And if you look at it, the bishops are beautifully posted, controlling all those diagonals, the light and the dark squares, or the dark diagonal. And so the king can only move to that square of the board. And so I push the pawn. And in this position, our opponent loses on time. But this is self-explanatory, really. After this bishop moves, this pawn will promote to a queen. And after that, probably 3 moves or 4 moves, then checkmate will follow, definitely. And so that is the game. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And I think that will be all for now. Again, thank you for watching. And if you believe that you're already an expert, you're a better player, then this video is not for you. And to all chess enthusiasts out there, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Bye for now.